Hello, welcome to episode 2 of the Blockchain Revolution. Today we are going to talk about tokenization. This is a broad and important topic if you want to understand how the blockchain is going to change the world of business. We're going to break down some of the simple concepts for you today. So the first thing to talk about when we refer to tokenization is what is being tokenized. Before we get into what that means is why do we care about this? Well, the world of business and people in general have assets. And we refer to assets as any item of value that is potentially redeemable for cash. There's generally two classifications of assets. In this context, there's personal assets and then there's business assets. Personal assets can include all sorts of things. It could include actual money. It could include property that you own. It could include gold. It could include diamonds, art. I mean, there's a long list of items that people want to own because those items have value and utility in some capacity when you're sort of storing your wealth, transacting your wealth, and some of these things are functional like a house that you could live in. All right, so we understand what an asset is. It's something of value. Often assets are exchanged and traded as part of financial markets. And so what we're going to talk about today is how these assets become represented on the blockchain, and that is the process of tokenization. It is when an issuer creates digital tokens using distributed ledger technology or blockchain, which if you watched in video 1 is sort of a new version of storing access and property rights to assets. So these digital tokens are created and distributed on the blockchain, and they can either represent a physical asset like real estate or gold or diamonds, or they could represent a digital asset, which is something more conceptual. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, why are we talking about this? Why bother tokenizing all these assets? What is the point of putting a physical asset? I'm just going to use gold as an example because it's an easy one to understand. Why would you bother putting gold on the blockchain when you have physical gold that I could buy and sell? Well, one reason is that gold is heavy. And so if I wanted to become a trader of gold and I was going to trade with, let's just for simplicity's sake, say I have a market of 100 different people. We all like to trade gold and we go back and forth. If we're going to be physically trading the gold, we've got to move that around. And if we're spread out across the globe, there's logistical and expense challenges in that. So the one benefit to tokenization is it removes the need to actually exchange the physical asset on a frequent basis. The other thing that's nice is it will allow you to exchange more easily using online software. So we could create an exchange, there are many of them, where digital assets that are tokenized are able to be exchanged between people and businesses, etc. And what we're then doing is using the advantages of technology to be able to communicate that we want to do a trade, actually do the trade, and then use the digital asset, sort of a currency, to actually settle up that trade. One key advantage to tokenizing assets, and I'm going to try to make this point a couple of times, is that it increases the liquidity of certain markets and liquidity of certain assets. And that's a sort of jargony term that refers to how easy it is to buy and sell something. So let's say I own a property in some obscure part of the world, and I need money. And so I want to go and sell this property. In some cases, that might be difficult to do. Let's say the economy isn't doing great, or I want a lot of money for it, or it's just not like in a super hip area where people are buying. That means that my asset isn't very liquid. It's not easy for me to sell this property. So if I were to convert this property into tokenized assets, what I could do potentially is take my piece of property, let's say it's 100 acres, and I could have 1,000 tokens represent this property. So I'm essentially kind of breaking it up into a lot of smaller components that I could then go to an exchange and offer for sale. So this is something we'll also cover in the real estate video as well. Being able to take one asset and fractionalize it is one of the cool benefits to tokenization, is that we are going to create this digital representation of the property rights associated with this actual land in my example. We're going to split it up into smaller chunks so that somebody who maybe couldn't afford to buy 100 acres could buy a tenth of an acre if I offered 1,000 different shares of it. What does it actually mean to own an asset? This is a key to understanding how you can trade or sell an asset using an exchange, because you have to first understand, what does it really mean to own something? We often like to think about in literal physical terms, that if I have a bar of gold, owning it means I literally physically possess it. But there are other rights associated with owning an asset. I also have the right to lend my asset. I have the right to convert my asset into something else. I have the right to use this asset as collateral. There's a list of property rights that are associated with owning assets, and they're going to vary a little bit, whether it's land or something physical like gold, or a contract, or the sort of the ownership of a business. There's a bunch of different things that you could own, but each of those fundamentally equate to various rights that you have as the owner of this thing. And these rights then get tokenized. So that's a nuance that I think is important to understand, is that when we tokenize an asset, we are specifying which of the property rights associated with owning that asset are going to be represented by a token on the blockchain, and then kind of create X number of tokens, which are then able to be bought, sold, exchanged, stored, whatever. And when we think about this concept of tokenization, sometimes it's easy to think about in terms of a casino and poker chips. And if I were to go to a casino with some cash, I would go to the main office place, whatever you call it, and I would give them my cash, and they would give me these poker chips, which are tokens, in return. So the token represents my right to get back cash from the counter lady. And one of the advantages of using tokenization in lieu of actually trading the actual asset, one is fractionalization that I mentioned before, where you could take an asset and split it up into smaller components, which is harder to do in the non-blockchain world. Another advantage is that you don't have to tokenize all the property rights. So let's say you own a bunch of gold, and I want to give you the ability to use my gold as collateral for a loan. And I could tokenize that, and you could buy it, and you could use that as collateral in that example. But I don't have to necessarily give you all the property rights associated with owning that gold. That's just one example, but it is important to understand that there are a variety of property rights associated with owning an asset, and that tokenization could potentially tokenize all of those rights or not, so that you can be clear and specific what exactly, when you buy a token, are you getting the rights to. The tokenization discussion also comes up when we refer to asset-backed currencies, sometimes gold-backed currencies. You might be familiar with the expression, the gold standard, which is how the US dollar was backed pre-1970s. The idea here is that you have some kind of physical asset. In this case, it would be, we'll just use gold again as an example. And instead of us using gold itself to buy and sell things, another currency, in the original case with us in America, it was the US dollar, the Federal Reserve note, was created as kind of a token that represented the gold. So in the case of the blockchain and digital assets, you could also create a digital asset that is backed by a physical asset like gold. And what that means functionally is that you have the ability to treat gold as money and transact with gold as money, but the logistical convenience of using a digital asset on the blockchain, where we can exchange that value very, very quickly. We also can have a ledger that keeps track of all those transactions, so that you don't have one party accusing the other one of not receiving the assets. And you also can use those things for collateral for loans and other types of things that the business world uses pretty regularly. Not all cryptocurrencies are tokenized assets. So that is something I want to clarify as well. Each major blockchain, just to keep it simple, let's refer to things like Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP Ledger. These blockchains have a native currency that is used to process transactions. So let's use XRP as an example. So the XRP Ledger, if I want to send money or value from me to someone else, I have to pay a transaction fee, also referred to as a gas fee. So all the major layer 1 blockchains have a native asset that is used for the purposes of functional transactions on that blockchain. And those are not referred to as tokens typically, those are referred to as coins. So there is no other asset that XRP represents. That is an asset that was created originally to support the functioning of the blockchain. Now, it's still an asset. It's a digital asset, and people assign value to it, and it can be traded and exchanged. But there isn't a separate thing that XRP represents, like if you had tokenized gold or a tokenized stock or even a tokenized share in real estate. Those are all examples where the digital token represents something else. Sometimes people use the example of it's an IOU, that, I have this tokenized thing on the blockchain and it's correlating ideally in a one-to-one with some other thing that lives somewhere else. And the tokenization in that example will allow for, the asset to be more freely traded using technology in the blockchain. But there are some cryptocurrencies that are native to a blockchain. We call that a layer one, and they don't represent another asset. They still have value and can be traded, and they have utility. I just want to separate the semantics of what is considered a token and what is considered a coin. So native blockchains are the coins. There's also some nuances to having the ability to actually own things on the internet for the first time. So pre-blockchain, the only things that we really could own when it came to the internet and technology were domain names. So I could buy, mollyelmore.com, and I technically own it. And if you wanted to use it, you would have to get, access my property rights, and I would have to agree to lend it to you or share it with you or sell it to you. And nothing else is really owned. Like, you don't own your email address if you have a Gmail. If you own a if you have a website set up, you don't necessarily own that website. Generally, another company is hosting that for you. So blockchain and digital assets have given us the ability to take ownership, again, via these property rights of assets, whether they're native to the internet, native to technology, or whether they exist somewhere else offline. So, all right, here's my little list of things we want to cover. So tokenization refers to assets, which are things of value that are generally able to be exchanged for cash or some other type of money. Digital assets generally refers to these items being created for the blockchain and transacted and exchanged on the blockchain. They connect back to the property rights associated with owning an asset. So the asset itself is not on the blockchain. What the blockchain token represents are the various rights associated with owning it. Owning it, being able to lend it, being able to use collateral for loan, etc. There's a list of them. The nice thing about digital assets being tokenized is that it makes them easier to exchange, because you can go to essentially like an online store that allows you to buy and sell various tokens pretty quickly and pretty easily, which increases the liquidity of those assets. So, if I owned like some diamonds, let's say, and a whole bag of them, and I wanted to sell them, and I don't really know where to do that if I'm not like in Belgium or some other New York where there's like a hop-in diamond market. If I were to tokenize those diamonds, I could have a much easier time potentially selling them, because my geography is less of an issue, and I don't have to physically go to some location, or maybe I don't even have access or know the right people. So it's going to open up a lot of markets to more liquidity, meaning these assets will be more easily bought and sold, which will increase the size of these markets, will make them move more quickly. If you think about liquidity too, think about it in terms of a farmer's market, that you could have a tiny town where there's like a farmer's market on one street that has like 2 vendors. And then you go to another farmer's market and there's like 3 vendors. And there's not a lot of action going on. There's not a lot of people selling. There's not a lot of people buying. It's basically kind of a dud. So instead, if you took all the vendors in a particular area and put them all at one big market, and there was tons of stuff for sale, a lot more buyers would come, because there would be more opportunity for them to get the stuff that they want. A lot more transactions are happening. You would refer to that as a more liquid market. There's just more action. There's more buying and selling. It might be also better pricing, because if you went to a farmer's market and a bunch of people were selling the same kind of corn, it'd be unlikely that one guy is going to charge 10x what the other people are, because that just wouldn't work out in that market. So it does help with some price stability too, to have a lot of potential buyers and sellers in a market and have it be more liquid. All right, so that is your lesson on tokenization. Stay tuned for the next one in the series. And if you missed the first one on the blockchain, I'll put the link in the description. And please download our ebook called The Blockchain Revolution, which covers a lot of these key topics, particularly preparing the business world for the transition to the blockchain.